My grandmother has been severely ill my whole life. She has smoked cigarettes for over 50 years and is still a heavy smoker. She was diagnosed with a bad case of COPD at a fairly young age, before I was even born, but she never stopped smoking. I am a 20-year-old man now, and my grandma is still alive, even though she has suffered multiple heart attacks and strokes, and even been diagnosed with coronary artery disease and lung cancer. I remember my mum explaining to me that grandma is very sick and will die soon when I was just a little kid. All my life, she's been either sitting in a wheelchair, or on the couch, or walking extremely slowly with a rollator. Only time she stands up during the day are the moments when she goes to the balcony for a cigarette, or needs to use the bathroom. In both of these situations, she almost always needs some help from my grandfather too. She's often very grumpy, and you rarely see her smiling. I've always liked to think that she's grumpy and annoyed only because of her illness, and I've never saw her as a mean or bad person. She had a habit of giving me and my siblings some pocket money every Friday, on the condition that we had acted right and fulfilled our responsibilities, like school and housework. We lived only a mile away from our grandparents, and my school was right next to their house. I could even see into their backyard on break time, and sometimes my grandfather would be there doing some yard work and waving at me. I normally went on to pick up my weekly pocket money right after school on Fridays, and the typical meeting was very quick and quiet. I knocked on the door and waited for my grandpa to come and slowly open the door. He always opened it just a little bit, softly said hello, and pushed his hand through the door gap. I took the money, thanked him, and at that point, the door was already almost closed. Usually the visit was just that short, but sometimes Grandma wanted to come and see me quickly and walked very slowly to the door with her rollator. I remember the typical situations where I only met Grandpa at the door and tried to view Grandma through the little gap that was open. It always looked dark, shadowy, and quiet inside, and I thought Grandma was probably taking a nap. I liked the tradition of getting to meet my grandparents every Friday, and it was always a nice start to my weekend. But then, one Friday afternoon, when I was about 13 or 14 years old and going to pick up my pocket money, something very weird happened, and that sight still gives me chills and deep anxiety. It was a sunny autumn day, and I got out of school a bit earlier than usual. I took my bicycle out of the bike stand and headed to my grandparents' house. Like I said, it was a little earlier than usual, so they weren't ready for me yet. I went on to knock on the door, but no one came to open it. I waited for a moment, but still no one came. I was about to leave and thought no one was home, until I heard some noises from the inside. I thought they just didn't hear my first couple of knocks, and knocked again, a bit harder than last time. It still took a while, but finally the door opened, even less than normally. It was dark. I could only see the fuzzy figure of my grandpa, who didn't even say hello this time. He just gave me the money and whispered that Grandma was sleeping, because they were not expecting me to be here yet. At this point, the door gap was a bit bigger, so I could see into the living room where there was some kind of dim light. I was a little ashamed about my sudden visit and decided to whisper back that I was sorry and my school had just ended earlier today. Before I could say anything. I heard intensifying footsteps coming out of the living room, and immediately after, saw my grandmother running through the living room in a weird, creepy, and unnatural looking forward bent posture, not moving her arms at all. I looked there for probably half a second, but I was so terrified, it felt like a minute. Grandpa just slammed the door shut in front of my face, and I stayed behind the door, almost shaking from the fear and shock. So many thoughts in my head. How can Grandma move so fast? She is very ill and can't even walk without support. Why did Grandpa lie about her nap? And what the hell was that? As I started to walk away to get my bike and leave, I calmed down and thought that maybe she wasn't moving that fast, or Mum has exaggerated her bad condition. I didn't even really believe these explanations. I just had to get some sort of logical reason to calm down. I walked over the grass to get my bike that was parked right under my grandparents' bedroom. I hopped on it and took a quick look on the window that was right next to my face. What I saw next still haunts me, and even after all these years, I find it hard to think and explain. My grandma, staring straight at me, with big, wide-open eyes and a deranged smile. She didn't even look like my grandma. Or she did, but the expression was something that my grandma would never do with her face. She looked similar to the Momo face that roamed the internet a couple of years ago. She seemed to be sitting or squatting on the floor, because her face was on the lower edge of the window. I was instantly terrified by the thought of her being there, stalking me with that disturbing face, while I stood there, calming down, and was slowly starting to leave. I remember hiding my fear and responding to her stare with a little smile, but she didn't react at all. Then, my grandpa ran behind her and closed the curtains. I cycled home, fast, and told my mum the whole story, which she basically just ignored, thinking I over-exaggerated her speed. She couldn't understand why I was scared of her looking at me from the window. But she wasn't there. My grandma was not looking at me. She was stalking at me. After that day, I didn't go to get my pocket money for weeks. As time passed, I started to go visit them. At first with my mother, and later alone again. Grandma was always like I remembered. She can't even walk without support. No one ever mentioned anything about that day, and my grandparents were asking why I suddenly stopped visiting on Fridays. I know my grandpa remembers that, but I've always been too scared to ask. I kinda just want to forget the whole thing and spend as much time with my grandparents as possible. But I'll never forget that day. My terminally ill grandmother ran like a child and stalked me through the window like a psychopath. What was that? Hello, sinister listeners. If you've enjoyed this story, then you'll find all the author's information in the description below. For more content, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to succumb to the sinister.